All right, so now that we've ironed out the details from an employer perspective, what we should be looking at, the pros and cons of retirement plans in kind of a broad scope, let's move on to individuals. So planning for an individual's retirement needs, right? An employer or a firm isn't really going to have retirement needs. So what does this look like from an individual's perspective? So retirement planning in and of itself is very, very complicated, requires a number of specialties to do adequately. And it's not overlooked, but I would say the average person does not have adequate retirement savings. The median retirement savings for people in the U.S. at age 30 is zero. Okay, so that's the median. The average is obviously higher, but the median retirement savings for people at age 30 are zero. That's a little low. Okay, that's a little low. So it's important. It's complex, and the needs right now are actually pretty high because the largest portion of our current generations right now would be the baby boomers. And millennials aren't too far behind. Right now, the baby boomers still represent a large portion of the population, and they're retired or retiring. So that kind of brings up the issue of, well, if we have people who are relying on Social Security, because we all pay into that. We all do earn some of the credits for Social Security. Some get more, some get less, but we pay into that. Some pay more, some pay less. But if you have a large swath of the population that's retired or retiring, and smaller generations behind that, so fewer people paying in and fewer people pulling out the money, the funds, then that could lead us to a budget constraint, of course. And you've probably heard in the past that, oh, well, the Social Security Trust Fund is dwindling, so on and so forth, and that's true. But it is self-funding. Your payroll taxes do pay for it. Okay, so we're not 100% in dire straits just yet. Okay, but things would have to change, or I might see some of it, but you guys are a little bit younger than me, so it might be significantly different for you. Okay, so that's another reason retirement planning is very important. Because there are going to be some generational changes in needs due to changes in benefits. Now, that complexity that I mentioned earlier, what kind of schools of thought are required in this? So this is definitely, estate planning is very important. Financial planning is very important. Okay? There's some legalese. There's some, there are taxes involved, tax accounting, benefits planning. So it's a pretty challenging thing to do. And even the needs for individuals are dynamic. And that's what we'll go through here shortly. But what I want you to kind of get for this, for yourself, if you find yourself being a planner, or if you go to a planner, or if you talk to someone about retirement, if one person tells you they know the answer, or they know the best way to go about all this and approach it, and they didn't ask anyone else and they don't support it very well, you shouldn't listen to them. Or you can listen to them and be very skeptical. So if one person says they have all the answers for retirement planning, myself included, you should probably be a little weary. I'm not a tax accountant. I'm aware of the benefits for retirement planning and deferring taxes, but I'm not a specialist in that area. Also, I'm not a lawyer, right? So I know quite a bit about estate planning, retirement benefit planning. Not a lawyer, I'm not a tax accountant. So for any one person that has all the answers, I'd be a little skeptical. But we all need to be aware of the basics of retirement. Okay. So what's the process here? So we kind of have this 3 steps. Now, a lot of this is going to focus on the income level because that's important for the individual. What income are they used to? And how do they maintain that at retirement? We're going to go over assessing their needs, how we can meet their needs, or they can meet them, how we can help them meet them. And then talk about the overall funding. So how do we best assess the needs? Well, our own due diligence. This is fact finding. This is what this is. This is fact finding. We need financials. Might project some incomes and some expenses. Look at your cash flow. Current assets, current benefit plans. What do you want in the future? In other words, what's going to cost you in the future so that we can plan for that? And how dynamic might your income be? If for some reason you have a client that doesn't want to give you this information, that's fine, I guess. That's their choice, but I would suggest not trying to help them. Because you'll be trying to make a very important suggestion to them with very incomplete information. So we're talking about retirement. The best starting point is usually the benefits they have right now. What kind of plan? We talked about qualified. It's the qualified plan. Is it defined benefit? Or is it defined contribution? It's defined benefit. It's a little bit easier to kind of project the income in the future because they're telling you. And then all we have to do is estimate, let's say, your best 3 to 5 years of income. And we can get a lot closer. Whereas with defined contribution, we're going to have to estimate market returns. Do we want to be safe and say maybe just 5%? We'll go to the average, which is around 7%? Or should we have a number of projections from best to worst case scenario? The best answer is the last one, a number of projections. What kind of insurance do they have now? Will it last? Will it persist? Or does it end with termination or retirement? So what should we be focusing on? As much on the financial aspect of it as we can. What are they investing in? We've talked about that a good bit today. What are they, vested in? Not vesting in, vested in. So if it's a defined contribution retirement plan they have, what of that is their money right now? Some places offer 100% vesting on the first year. Ball State does. But I've had previous employers it would take 3 to 4 years. What do you get at retirement? If there are some defined benefits or what carries over. If not, then we're going to have to estimate based on what you're paying in now and what's being contributed now, what do we think you're going to have? Allowing room for error. So when I say best, average, or worst case, it really shouldn't just be 3 scenarios that you're planning out. Because every little portion on the income and expense that you're doing for a budget varies. You might have 5 or 10 different projections. Or you could have best, worst, and average case, but each little item varying quite a bit. That's a good start. It's a good start. Also, if it's defined contribution, how much can they contribute, either financially or is there a limit? Yet, maybe they could put $19,500 a year to the 401k, but should they? The answer is that it depends. Maybe they shouldn't. But maybe they have other opportunities elsewhere. So what do you need to know? That income, so that we can count on volatility, we can estimate make future projections. Assets. Simple things. Real estate usually might not appreciate. It's good to know that. Do they want do they want a retirement home? Do they want to stay in their primary residence? And that's in the housing needs later, but that's something to consider. What do they owe? That's something I haven't mentioned just yet. What are their debts? We're just talking about nice things so far. Well, maybe some expenses. We're talking about, we have assets and retirement plans. What about that debt? Very rare to not have debt. And debt's not always bad. It's your choice. It's kind of your leverage decision. But it's something to keep in mind. will I still be paying my mortgage after retirement? Some do. It might not be a problem, but that's something that we need to know. It's an expense we need to be aware of. It is necessary to be as complete and thorough as possible. One little tweak, turning that dial the wrong way, turning that expense lower than it should be, turning that income higher than it should be, might mean that individual has to work another 4 or 5 years. It might means their debt position is in no way, shape, or form good. They could have too much debt and it could be mostly bad. Now, there are goals outside of just being able to retire with X amount of income. There are other goals, and these goals can come to fruition before retirement. So some examples of that. College expenses. This could be for their children. It could be for your client. There's nothing wrong with going back to college. Okay? So just because you're working with someone who might be 30, 40, 50 years old, they might want to get their MBA at night or something like that. So college expenses in general is not uncommon. It could be that they have to worry about elder care. So if their parents need some long-term care and their parents didn't have you as their advisor and they didn't have long-term disability insurance or a long-term care plan, then your client might have to plan for that. Maybe, this could be an income or expense. Are they going to inherit anything, your client? Or do they want to leave an inheritance? Because if they want to leave a nest egg, they can't touch that. They want to leave $500,000 or $100,000 or $50,000, $10,000. They want to leave X amount to their children. They have to forget about that. And that's an expense they have to keep in mind. If they're going to get a windfall, then that's great. They know for sure we can budget for that. Do they want to give to a charity? That's not uncommon. Plenty of clients like to tithe. Not uncommon at all. But that's an expense. Tax deductible, but it's an expense. The problem is a lot of these are not so clear cut, but they are very important. Again, that dial being turned just the wrong way, or not up as high as it should be on expense, or too low for an income, is problematic. Okay. Now, for the meeting their needs. The book says there are 7 steps. That's not false, but it really can be cut into 3. The first is, what are we assuming? And that is important. And that's kind of where we get our best and worst case scenarios, play with the numbers and project. What are we assuming? The second step is almost entirely based on income. I would say all 4 of these could, maybe 5, could go into income. And then finally, if we're at a negative cash flow, then we have to change some things. So how are we going to change that? If we're in the red, what are we going to do to alleviate that? Right. So let's talk about the assumptions first. Some of these are going to be fairly easy to identify. How old are they now? Very easy. When do they want to retire? Okay. Probably a window of 5 to 7 years on that. Even age of death. Because the retirement plan has to last them from retirement to death. If we ignore any other needs. That's what we want it to do. So if we know the beginning and the end, then it helps us, at least from an NPV or time value of money perspective. We have the end, the number of periods. Okay? But any estimations after these factor assumptions are going to be heavily reliant on those. Living an extra 3 or 4 years could deplete those funds quickly. So some examples here of income estimation. One is the expense method. estimate the expenses, adjust accordingly if there's inflation or you think some expenses might be higher or lower. Some may not persist until retirement. Another, and we kind of see this mentioned when we're talking about the defined benefit plans, is just an income replacement. So, all right, well, when I retire, I want to have about 70 to 75% of my income coming back to retirement. If we add in the fact that maybe I'm not spending as much, and I'll get some Social Security, probably. If we add that in, then 70, 75% might be adequate. With no huge lifestyle changes. It could be that by the time I retire, I have a mortgage payment, so I wouldn't need quite as much. So how about assessing current income levels or retirement income levels? Okay. The things to consider, again, and we'll go into a little more detail about this. $1 today is not worth the same $1 30 years from now, right? We all know that. Okay. I'd much rather have $1 right now than wait 30 years for it. Okay, that dollar now could be worth $20 30 years from now, okay, depending on our appropriate discount factor. So we have to adjust for inflation, for purchasing power, or really lack thereof, okay, because that dollar becomes weaker. Okay. They could have income sources from assets that they hold, that retirement work in there. They have 401k contributions they're vested in. That's garnering some interest, accruing some interest. Income from future savings. We want to keep putting into that. And yes, there could be fixed income that you're getting upon retirement. Social Security would be an example of that. A defined benefit plan would also be that. Some of them will say, all right, we'll give you $500 a month from retirement until death. That's your pension. Okay, so that's a fixed income too. But again, $500 30 years from now is not the same as $500 from today. So what about cash flow projections? So this is where we can kind of estimate if we're in the red or not. So if we're in the red, we've got to change some things. If we're in the black, all right, stay the course for now, and we'll update a year or so. So we bring all this together, our income that we're aware of, okay, our best estimates, have a solid projection from best to worst case scenario, and look at the net. We have our expenses and our income. What does it look like we're going to be? If everything's in the black, okay. If we're in the red, we're going to have to make some changes. So if there's no shortfall, stay the course. The only problem with that is if we don't regularly check in, either as individuals or to our clients as planners, things change. Human beings are not static, we're dynamic. Our risk preferences also mirror that. Our savings mirror that. Our expenses mirror that. Things change. So just because someone looks like they're good at the age of 35 doesn't mean they're going to be good at the age of 55. There's some correlation there. Very rarely do people just change overnight and become more risk-taking. So what kind of avenues are available though? So we need to periodically check. But if they're in the red right now, no. They're just a few little things we could tweak. Okay. All right, so what about that nest egg or that retirement requirement at the end? Okay. So what would they be? The four big ones tend to be housing, healthcare, what's coming in through pensions, and then their income shocks. So simple housing considerations. As I mentioned before, do they want to keep that home or do they want to retire somewhere else? Do they want to keep both of them? It's not uncommon for some people to be so used to their mortgage payment, once the house is paid off, hey, they'll keep it. It's probably appreciated in value, and then they'll buy another home somewhere else as their summer home. Not uncommon. You might see that with some of your clients. But maybe they want to move to the summer vacation home and stay there. Those things to consider. And that could be an income source too. Or they could rent it out. A few options. Healthcare is very important. Okay, so healthcare costs have been increasing Therefore, health insurance premiums have increased because the underlying severity of the risk has increased. That's how insurance products work. And yes, it may be true that they are fine with their Medicare, and they buy the Medicare Part C, the Advantage plan, and addendum to their A and B. They even have Medicare Part D for drug coverage. But that's what we're estimating now. This is subject to change. You know, there's a Medicare Modernization Act some 15 years ago. 15 years in retirement planning, a lot can change. I think we've already covered this with the income, but I think it's good to have it mentioned here again. So how much income do you need net of what you're guaranteed? So this gets us closer to that cash shortfall I was talking about earlier. Now, it could be if we take, certain amounts over the year, we could kind of move up on the progressive tax brackets. So maybe after a certain point, we don't get quite as much back from that next dollar. So it might be, if you don't need the money, you might can wait a little bit if they find themselves right on the cusp of the next tax bracket. Now, of course, not all their money is taxed at that rate. We know that. But that next dollar would be taxed at that higher rate. All right. So then what about shortfalls? So we mentioned that a bit with the meeting needs, but now that we have kind of these housing needs covered, healthcare, pensions, and all that, what can they do if they're not, again, in the black and they're in the red? Well, save more, spend less is kind of how it comes out. And that might seem simple. It is, at least, in general terms. But some people are not able to do that easily. Okay? You might get used to your certain level of spending and might not be able to put a little bit more into your retirement. That's where you'll kind of come in to really assess their expenses and cut them down. But save more, spend less. You could alter your goals as well. Maybe I'll work an extra 2 years. I won't try to retire at 65. I'll wait till 67. Most people retire early. Right now, normal retirement age is 67. It will probably move up. So that's usually when you're privy to all your benefits that you've earned through Social Security, definitely all your retirement plans. Medicare is at 65. But most people retire prior to 67, even though it's considered the normal retirement age for Social Security benefits.